The evening sun cast a soft golden glow across the polished wooden floors of the Magnolia Bistro, a small but bustling restaurant nestled in the heart of a diverse urban neighborhood. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the aroma of simmering herbs, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. This wasn't just any restaurant. It was a safe haven where the community gathered, where people of all backgrounds felt seen and appreciated. In the middle of it all was Ava Johnson, a striking black woman in her early 30s. Her radiant smile could brighten even the darkest day, and her confident demeanor reflected years of resilience. Ava wore her natural curls pinned back in a sleek style, her uniform, a crisp white blouse and black slacks, pressed to perfection. Ava's eyes sparkled with warmth as she weaved through the tables, greeting each customer with genuine enthusiasm. She had a natural charm that put people at ease. "Hi there. Welcome back. The usual today?" she asked a regular customer, her voice laced with familiarity and kindness. She took pride in her role, not just as a waitress but as a cornerstone of the restaurant's welcoming environment. Her compassion extended beyond her duties. When a child spilled juice across the floor, Ava was the first to grab a towel, kneeling with a soft laugh to comfort the embarrassed parents. To the customers, she was more than a server. She was the heart of the Magnolia Bistro, a living embodiment of its values: community, warmth, and respect. Yet, beneath her poised exterior lay a quiet awareness. She had seen subtle prejudices creep in over the years, disguised as politeness. At a corner table, Richard Thompson, a middle-aged white man, adjusted his navy blazer, his posture rigid. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and a gold watch gleamed on his wrist, signaling his affluence. He scanned the menu with a slight frown, as if the offerings were beneath his standards. His presence contrasted starkly with the relaxed patrons around him. Richard exuded an air of entitlement, from the way he tapped his fingers impatiently to the sharp glance he cast at a table of young, diverse friends laughing nearby. His tone was curt when he addressed Ava. "Water. No ice," he said without looking up, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Though Ava maintained her composure, a flicker of tension crossed her face. Richard's behavior wasn't new to her. She had encountered such attitudes before, subtle, often unspoken, but unmistakably rooted in bias. His gestures, though small, carried a weight that hinted at his discomfort with her authority in this space. The bistro itself was a testament to inclusivity. Walls adorned with vibrant local artwork celebrated the neighborhood's cultural diversity, and the soft hum of jazz played in the background. Families of all races dined together, their conversations blending into a harmonious buzz. The staff, a mix of different ethnicities and ages, moved seamlessly, their interactions reflecting mutual respect and camaraderie. Behind the counter, Carlos, the head chef, barked out orders in a mix of English and Spanish, while Maya, the hostess, greeted guests with a warm smile. The restaurant radiated an energy that encouraged people to linger, to share stories over meals, and to feel at home. Yet, amid this vibrant harmony, there were occasional cracks. The older couple near the window who shifted uncomfortably when a black family sat next to them. The murmured complaints when certain songs played a little louder. These moments were rare but significant, subtle reminders of the prejudices that still lingered beneath the surface. As Ava returned to Richard's table with his water, their eyes met briefly. His gaze was cold, his jaw tight. "Are you sure you got that order right?" he questioned, his voice dripping with condescension. Ava took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the tray for a split second before she answered calmly, "Yes, sir. Is there anything else you need?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "I'll let you know," he said, his tone dismissive. Ava turned away, her smile intact but strained. Nearby, Maya exchanged a glance with Carlos. The tension was palpable, though no words were spoken. In the background, a glass clinked against a plate a little too loudly, and the hum of conversation seemed to quiet, just for a moment. Something was shifting in the Magnolia Bistro, and everyone could feel it. The Magnolia Bistro hummed with its usual energy, conversations weaving through the room like a comforting melody. Ava moved gracefully from table to table, her presence a steady force amid the evening rush. However, The air around Richard's table was thick with an unspoken tension. "Excuse me." Richard's voice cut through the noise, sharp and impatient. Ava approached, her smile unwavering. "Yes, sir," she responded with calm professionalism. Richard glared at his plate. "This steak is overcooked. I asked for medium rare, and this is practically burnt. Do you even know what medium rare means?" Ava glanced at the steak, perfectly pink in the center. "I'm sorry you're not satisfied, sir. I'll have the kitchen remake it if you'd like." "That's not the point," Richard snapped, his voice rising. "You people never get it right." A hush fell over the tables nearby, conversation stalling as heads subtly turned. Ava's fingers tightened slightly around her notepad, but her voice remained steady. "I assure you, sir, we'll correct it immediately." "You assure me?" Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think that's enough? You've been incompetent from the moment I walked in here." "Typical." The word hung in the air like a dagger. Ava froze, her smile faltering. "Sir, I'm doing my best to serve you." Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "Your best isn't good enough." His hand shot out, and with a resounding crack, he slapped Ava across the face. Gasps echoed through the restaurant as the room plunged into stunned silence. Plates clattered against tables, and children's laughter ceased. The warmth of the Magnolia Bistro evaporated in an instant, replaced by a chilling disbelief. Ava staggered back, one hand instinctively rising to her cheek. The sting of the slap burned her skin, but the emotional pain cut deeper. For a moment, she stood motionless, her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to shed. Her mind raced. Should she retaliate? Should she walk away? A part of her wanted to scream, to let the anger and humiliation pour out. But Ava, ever composed, drew a deep breath. I need a moment," she whispered, her voice trembling but dignified. She turned on her heel, walking briskly toward the kitchen, her back straight despite the tears threatening to spill. As she disappeared behind the swinging doors, a murmur began to ripple through the restaurant. The peaceful ambience of the Magnolia Bistro was shattered. Customers exchanged uneasy glances, some looking toward the exit as though contemplating leaving. Others stared at Richard, their faces etched with disbelief and disgust. Maya, the hostess, stood frozen at the entrance, her hand covering her mouth. Carlos stormed out of the kitchen, his eyes blazing. "What the hell just happened?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Call the police," a woman shouted from the back, her voice shaking with outrage. "No, wait," another customer interjected. "Let's see how management handles this." Richard, meanwhile, remained standing, his chest heaving. "She was disrespectful," he muttered, though the weight of the room's gaze bore down on him. The air was thick with unspoken judgment, and for the first time, Richard's arrogance seemed to waver. A small child clung to their mother's leg, whispering, "Mommy, why did he hit her?" The mother hushed them, pulling them close, her eyes filled with both fear and anger. The staff gathered near the kitchen door, whispering among themselves. Some looked ready to confront Richard, while others seemed paralyzed by the gravity of the situation. The restaurant's unity was fractured, but there was a shared understanding. This moment would change everything. The hum of the Magnolia Bistro had been replaced by a suffocating silence. Ava stood in the kitchen, her hands braced against the stainless steel counter. The sting on her cheek had dulled, but the emotional weight pressed heavily on her chest. She clenched her fists, trying to steady her breathing. Out in the dining area, the tension boiled over. Carlos, the head chef, was the first to act. He marched out of the kitchen, his face a mask of fury. "You don't lay a hand on anyone here," he said, his voice low but firm, each word laced with controlled rage. Richard crossed his arms, his expression defiant. "She was out of line," he retorted. "I'm the customer. I have rights." A murmur of disapproval swept through the crowd. "You have no right to put your hands on her." Maya, the hostess, shouted from the doorway. Her voice trembled, but her stance was unwavering. Several customers chimed in. "She deserves an apology," one man demanded. "This isn't about a steak," a woman said, her tone dripping with disdain. "This is about respect, or your lack of it." Richard's face flushed with anger, but he refused to back down. "You people don't understand. She was disrespectful first." The tension thickened as the room divided into those who stood by Ava and those who remained silent, unsure how to proceed. At a table near the back, Mr. Thompson, a regular customer who had been coming to the Magnolia Bistro for years, stood up. His deep voice cut through the chaos. "I've been served by Ava countless times. She's professional, respectful, and a credit to this establishment. This man is out of line." Beside him, Sarah, a young server who often shadowed Ava, wiped tears from her eyes. "Ava trained me when I first started," she said, stepping forward. "She taught me everything about handling tough situations. She's never let anyone down. She doesn't deserve this." Carlos nodded in agreement, his arms crossed. "We stand with Ava. If you can't respect her, you don't belong here." The solidarity among staff and patrons was undeniable. Every voice raised in defense of Ava chipped away at Richard's bravado, yet his refusal to acknowledge his wrongdoing kept the atmosphere charged. In the kitchen, Ava paced. The urge to confront Richard burned within her, yet she wrestled with the desire to maintain her professionalism. She thought of her years of hard work, her pride in being a cornerstone of the restaurant, and how easily one moment could unravel it all. Her reflection in the metal countertop caught her eye. "Who am I if I let this slide?" she whispered to herself. Her heart pounded with conflicting emotions, the need to preserve her dignity versus the fear of losing control. The memory of her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Stand tall, even when others try to tear you down. Your worth is not defined by their ignorance." Ava drew in a deep breath, her fingers trembling but her resolve strengthening. She wanted to fight back, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been belittled or disrespected. Yet, she knew that confronting Richard impulsively could escalate things further. She had to choose her words carefully. She had to rise above him without sinking to his level. Tears of frustration welled up, but she blinked them away. "This isn't over," she thought. "I'm not done yet." Ava took a moment to compose herself. Her eyes scanned the kitchen until they landed on the framed photo hanging by the office door. A picture of her with the restaurant's founder, Mrs. Harris, who had mentored her from the start. It was more than a picture. It was a reminder of her journey and the trust placed in her. Ava reached for her phone, hesitating for a moment before sending a quick text. Then, she retrieved a file from the office, a file containing employee records, including a document that would soon turn the tide of the confrontation. As she returned to the dining area, the murmur of voices quieted. Whispers passed between customers. Some noticed the determined look in Ava's eyes, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The room fell quiet as Ava re-entered the dining area. Her presence felt different now, as though she carried something heavier than the weight of the moment. Every eye turned to her, curiosity mixing with an undercurrent of anticipation. The heated exchange had calmed for a brief second, but the tension in the air was palpable. Ava took a deep breath, her fingers still slightly trembling from the emotional storm she'd weathered. But this time, she wasn't trembling from fear or doubt. This was something else entirely. Ava stood in front of Richard, her posture straight, her eyes unflinching. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. The words that followed seemed to hang in the air, making everyone lean in just a little closer. "I am the one who runs this place. I own the Magnolia Bistro." The silence was deafening. Richard froze, his mouth slightly agape as the revelation struck him like a thunderclap. His eyes darted around, searching the faces of the people around him, some of whom were staff, others familiar patrons. All of them, until now, had watched the events unfold with an uneasy discomfort. But now, their gaze shifted. The power had clearly shifted. The realization spread across the room like wildfire. Whispers erupted, first soft and uncertain, then growing in volume. "She's the owner?" someone asked in disbelief. "But she's the waitress," another murmured. The whole room seemed to be processing the fact that the woman they had just seen humiliated was not just an employee. She was the one who owned this space, the one who had worked to create and maintain the inclusive environment they all enjoyed. Ava didn't flinch. She stood her ground, feeling every pair of eyes on her. Richard's face turned crimson. His previous air of arrogance had drained from him, leaving only confusion and shame in its wake. Richard's stunned silence was replaced by an attempt at a weak defense. "This is ridiculous. I didn't know," he muttered, trying to regain some semblance of composure. His voice cracked, betraying the realization that had just hit him. He was no longer the paying customer who had the power in the situation. Instead, he was an ignorant man who had just slapped the very person who had the ability to change the trajectory of his life with a single word. But the truth had already settled in, and it had settled into everyone's hearts. A woman of color, a black woman, was the owner of the Magnolia Bistro, the same woman he had treated with such blatant disrespect only moments ago. He wasn't just insulting an employee. He was demeaning the very person who had built and maintained the very place he had taken for granted. The restaurant staff, who had remained mostly silent until now, began to stir. Maya, the hostess, shook her head in disbelief, her voice low but furious. "You slapped the boss? You don't know who you're dealing with." Carlos, the chef, took a step forward, his arms crossed, a mixture of pride and anger in his eyes. "She owns this place. She doesn't have to take anything from anyone. You've disrespected the wrong person, my friend." Ava's eyes softened slightly as she watched the shift unfold. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been belittled or oppressed, every person who had been dismissed or made to feel invisible. She wasn't standing alone. Ava turned her attention back to Richard. The air was thick with tension, but there was a calmness in her now that had not been there moments ago. It wasn't cold, but it was firm. "I've built this place from the ground up," she said, her voice unwavering. "I've fought for the kind of inclusive space where everyone, no matter their background, feels valued and seen." Richard's face crumbled as his arrogance dissolved entirely. I didn't know. I didn't mean it. I was just frustrated," he stammered. His words came too late, too little too late. There was no undoing the slap, no way to take back the disrespect he had shown. The words now felt hollow, like a man who was desperate to regain control but had lost it completely. Ava's gaze softened, but her tone remained measured. "You didn't know? Maybe not. But that doesn't change what you did. And it doesn't change who I am." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Richard could feel the shame creep into his chest. For the first time, he realized the enormity of his actions. The white man who had felt entitled, superior, and untouchable just moments ago was now just a man, left speechless and exposed. Across the room, customers exchanged glances. Some were silently nodding, a few shamefully turning away, but all of them were forced to confront the stark reality of the moment. The atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. No longer was this just about a customer and a waitress. This was about the power of identity, respect, and the far-reaching consequences of prejudice. Ava didn't wait for an apology. She didn't need it. "You should leave," she said, her words measured but firm. "This space isn't for you." Richard, stunned and humiliated, stood there for a moment longer before turning toward the door. His feet shuffled as if the weight of his actions was finally sinking in, and as he stepped outside, the door swung shut behind him. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with the quiet acknowledgement of something profound. Ava had not only defended herself, but had redefined the power dynamic in the room. She wasn't just the owner of the bistro. She had become a symbol of resilience and dignity. The customers who had watched with a mix of unease and judgment now saw her with a newfound respect. Maya and Sarah exchanged glances, both of them silently acknowledging the strength it had taken for Ava to stand tall in the face of such blatant disrespect. Ava walked back to her table, where she had left her things, feeling the weight of the moment settle within her. She wasn't just the victim anymore. She was a catalyst for change. And in that brief but powerful exchange, she had created a shift that would resonate beyond that evening, an awakening for everyone who had witnessed it. The atmosphere in the Magnolia Bistro had shifted. What had been a tense and somber silence now simmered with quiet but resolute energy. Ava walked through the restaurant again, but this time it was with a different kind of strength. The look on her face wasn't one of anger or pain anymore. It was one of purpose, and the patrons who had witnessed the previous scene, whether they had been in the moment or not, could now see her in a different light. The days following Richard's exit were filled with a surprising outpouring of support for Ava. Regulars, who had once exchanged polite pleasantries with her, now came forward with apologies and expressions of solidarity. Some of them, especially those who had been in the restaurant that night, spoke up about what had happened, vowing to never allow such behavior to go unchallenged in their presence again. The local community, a blend of races and backgrounds, seemed to rally around Ava. On her social media, she posted a brief but powerful message: respect doesn't come with a price. It is earned by simply seeing each other as equals. It resonated far beyond her online followers. The post went viral, and soon, the Magnolia Bistro became more than just a restaurant. It became a symbol of standing against discrimination and prejudices in all its forms. Meanwhile, Richard was not left to his own devices. Days after the incident, he returned to the bistro, though this time it wasn't as a customer. He stood outside the restaurant nervously, hesitant but determined. He had spent the last few days reflecting on the impact of his actions, battling with his own guilt. His encounter with Ava had shaken him deeply. He had to make things right. When he entered, the familiar faces of the staff greeted him cautiously. He approached Ava at her office desk, the air heavy with the weight of his apology. "I've come to apologize," he began, his voice low but sincere. "I was wrong, and I treated you horribly. I can't undo what I did, but I need you to know that I'm sorry, and I want to make things right." Ava looked up at him. Her expression was calm but guarded. She took a breath, processing his words. Then, without hesitation, she responded, "Apologies aren't enough, but I appreciate that you've come here to say this. It's a start." Though her words were stern, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, an acknowledgement that growth was possible. Richard nodded, understanding the weight of her response. His journey toward redemption had begun. Ava's strength continued to influence the bistro. As the weeks passed, the energy in the restaurant became warmer, more unified. Conversations at the tables were no longer simply about food or weather, but included discussions about tolerance and the need for inclusivity. The staff, once passive observers in the face of prejudice, now took an active stance. They set a precedent, holding themselves accountable for one another and their guests. The restaurant, once a place of good food and service, transformed into a safe space, an environment where respect wasn't just expected, it was demanded. The regulars began to see the Magnolia Bistro as more than just a favorite dining spot. It became a beacon of unity in the community. Ava's actions had inspired many to look inward and confront their own biases and privileges. One evening, a table full of customers who had once witnessed the altercation stood together, sharing stories about their own experiences with prejudice. The conversation wasn't one-sided. It was a dialogue, a sharing of lessons learned and revelations made. There was an unspoken commitment among them to do better, to be better. Ava wasn't just the owner of a restaurant anymore. She had become the center of a movement toward greater respect, compassion, and understanding. Ava stood in front of the restaurant one evening, taking in the view of the crowd gathered inside. The place was alive with the kind of energy she had always hoped for, a place where differences were celebrated and respect wasn't just a byword, but a standard. Looking out the window, she thought back to the incident, to the slap that had started it all. There was pain in that memory, but there was also a profound sense of clarity. Sometimes, it took something disruptive to expose the truth, to see people for who they truly were, both the victim and the perpetrator. And in that raw moment, there had been a revelation. Standing up for herself had meant standing up for everyone who had ever been wronged. As she walked back into the restaurant, she felt a quiet strength settle within her. Ava had learned that forgiveness, though hard, was necessary, not for the ones who had wronged her, but for herself. It had freed her from the weight of bitterness and allowed her to heal. The evening ended with a group of patrons sitting at a large table near the window. Ava made her way over to greet them, her heart light. The familiar faces from the community greeted her warmly, and as they exchanged pleasantries, one of the regulars, Margaret, an older black woman, stood up. She raised a glass, and the whole table followed suit. To Ava, Margaret said, her voice strong and clear, who showed us all the true meaning of strength, and to a world where kindness and respect are never optional. The room echoed with a chorus of cheers, and Ava smiled. It wasn't the grand resolution of a fairy tale, but it was something far more important. It was real. It was a community standing together, acknowledging the pain and the progress that had been made, and embracing the possibilities for a more compassionate future. Ava's eyes met Richard's, who had entered quietly, standing off to the side. He nodded at her, the gesture small but significant. She returned the nod, knowing that it wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about understanding the change that needed to happen, both within him and within society as a whole. The evening continued, and the restaurant was filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. It was a new beginning for everyone in that room, a beginning where accountability and respect were the foundations upon which the future would be built. In a world where prejudice often goes unchallenged, it's essential to stand up against injustice. Ava's story is a reminder that empathy, respect, and accountability are the keys to a better future. If you believe in these values, share this story and subscribe for more narratives that inspire change and challenge societal norms. Let's create a world where kindness isn't optional, but the standard.